Hello there, our broiler chicks, starting from the hatchery till they are reaching our farm and till the age of marketing, they are undergoing a number of stresses. These stresses, it includes transportation, keeping in the farm, brooding management, feeding management, and also the vaccination. Apart from these stresses, one important stress is the seasonal stress. Even within the seasonal stress, I can say the summer stress is the very, very important one to which our birds are undergoing, and each year this is becoming a very, very important one on managing our broilers. What is stress? Stress is a response to an adverse stimuli. What is heat stress? Heat stress, it is a result of a negative balance of the net heat energy that is being excreted to the environment by our birds and the net heat energy that is being produced within the body. How to assess the heat stress? Heat stress can easily be assessed by way of summing of the external environmental temperature in Fahrenheit plus the relative humidity. Put together both the environmental temperature in Fahrenheit along with the relative humidity, it should not exceed 160. If it exceeds 160, it leads to more kind of a heat stress, and ultimately our birds will be going into the heat stroke. The normal body temperature of our chicken is, say, 104 to 105 degree Fahrenheit. How they regulate their body temperature? They are regulating their body temperature by way of four means, like the convection, radiation, evaporative cooling, and as well as conduction. Out of these four methods, the evaporative cooling, that plays a critical role. What are the symptoms of heat stress? Rather, how our birds will behave or respond to the heat stress. They will try to move away from other birds, and they will try to go to the wall of the poultry house wherein they can get the fresh air, and they will try to extend the wings so that they can have the space, that means the bare skin through which they can dissipate the heat. Here we need to remember that our birds are not having the sweat glands, unlike the mammals. And apart from these symptoms, our birds, they will try to sit in one particular place idle. They will be drinking more water, there will be reduced feed intake, and apart from this thing, one very important thing is panting. There will be an increased respiratory rate. Normally, if you take our birds, they used to breathe 25 breaths per minute. That means the respiratory rate. Whereas in the case of the heat stress or during a summer day, it used to be, say, some 10 times higher. That means what I'm trying to say here is 250 breaths per minute. Panting, is it good for the health of our birds? Slow panting, yes, it's a normal activity and that can be sustained over a period of time. But the heavy panting really will make our birds more tiresome because it is spending more amount of energy during the panting. And during the panting, what will happen is there will be heavy loss of the carbon dioxide to the outside environment, and with that leads to the buildup of pH, that means increase in blood pH, which we normally call it as respiratory alkalosis. In addition, there will be the accumulation of the bicarbonate ions in the body, that means in the blood. So that for which our birds will try to respond to excrete those bicarbonate ions. So that leads to high amount of energy spent by our bird during the panting. So this coupled together, that leads to heavy loss of electrolytes. Not only the bicarbonate ions, but also the potassium along with other important electrolytes. What are the effects of heat stress? Heat stress affects our birds in terms of a poor gut health, in terms of immunosuppression, as well as it affects the bone health, and in case of the layers and breeders, it leads to poor shell quality, poor eggshell quality, and ultimately it leads to poor carcass quality, and of course it has an impact, that means the negative impact on the food safety. In addition to the effect of heat stress on the gut microbiota imbalance, it has also got an impact on the tight junction, that means the intestinal integrity. What will happen during heat stress is the intestinal epithelial barrier, it becomes more permeable, so that it allows the foreign substances, obnoxious substances like bacterial antigens and all, they are being allowed into the circulation. So that means it leads to the kind of a disease development, and also it develops a condition called as leaky gut. With reference to the bone health, we were talking about panting. Panting leads to respiratory alkalosis. This makes the more carbon dioxide excretion and ultimately respiratory alkalosis, which leads to poor availability of ionized calcium. So because of the poor calcium absorption during these summer times, it leads to kind of a leg weakness in our broilers, and in the case of the layers and breeders, the calcium will not be available for the shell formation. So this is with reference to the bone health. Coming to the immunity part, see, in case of any kind of a stress, there will be an increased corticosteroid production. So this corticosteroid production, ultimately it leads to the immunosuppression, means it reduces the immune organ development. It has got a poor HL ratio, that means the immune cells ratio, that ultimately leads to immunosuppression, which invites or makes our birds more prone for the diseases. This is with reference to immunity. One another effect of heat stress is on the meat quality. Oftentimes, we are not giving the importance to this particular aspect, that means effect of heat stress on the meat quality. What will happen is, if you are not giving the adequate management practices, that leads to production of the birds with the pale, soft, exudative meat. This is simply called as PSE meat. So what happens here is, because of the summer stress, because of the heat stress, there will be a protein denaturation that leads to poor texture and decreased water holding capacity in the meat. So ultimately, the quality of the meat is being degraded or getting lost. These kind of birds, when we are sending it out to the processing plant, ultimately it will get rejected. And even at the wet market, the butchers, they will try to degrade this particular carcasses. These are all the effects of heat stress that ultimately has an effect on the performance or profitability of our business in terms of poor FCR, poor body weight, and the mortality. So, as we had seen in the beginning, this leads to huge economic losses. How to take care of heat stress, or what are all the mitigation strategies? There is no single solution for taking care of the heat stress. We need to have a multifactorial approach. Let us see a few housing strategies to mitigate the heat stress. One of the important strategy is EHC, that means early heat conditioning. In this particular strategy, what we are doing is we are exposing our chicks between 3 to 5 days on any one particular day. We are exposing them to higher temperature, higher brooding temperature, that is 36 degrees Celsius for 24 hours. This helps our birds to tolerate the huge heat stress or the very high heat stress during the later part of their life, around some 4 weeks or 5 weeks of age. This also helps them to get acclimatized to the higher temperature. This EHC, early heat conditioning, you may ask, when we are exposing our chicks to higher temperature, can we get the same performance? Yes, you are correct. During the first week, there may be a reduced body weight, but it gets compensated at a later point of time. And also the EHC chickens, the chicks which are exposed to higher temperature, higher ambient temperature of 36 degrees Celsius, they really performed very well as per the standard. And also they got a very good acclimatization to the higher heat at a later stage of their life. The other strategies under the housing. We can plant the trees in and around the house. That will help in reducing the heat within the house. We can grow the grass around the house. So this will help in reducing the radiation of the heat inside the house. Apart from planting the trees, we should always ensure that the long axis of our poultry house should be only on the east-west direction. And also we can have an overhang of 1.5 meter as an extension of the roof, which can help in falling off, that means preventing the direct sunlight falling onto our chicks, or that means onto the house. Other than that, we can recommend the whitewashing of the roofs and tiles, which can help in reflecting the direct sunlight so that it can have a very good cooling effect, or I can say it can reduce the environment, that is the ambient temperature inside the house. Apart from whitewashing the roof, it is also recommended to cover the roof with the insulating materials like paddy straw, sugarcane leaves, as well as torches, and also kind of a hay. And you can sprinkle the water over it, which can help in cooling the house. It is also recommended to have the sprinklers as well as foggers to be positioned, so that sprinklers you can run in on a continuous basis, and the foggers inside the house you can run it in a consistent way, so that it helps in preventing the temperature, more accumulation of high temperature, and also it helps in giving the cool atmosphere for our chicks. When we are talking about the fogging, you please ensure that the particle size of the water, it should be in the form of a mist. One another housing strategy is having the fans installed. That could be ceiling fans or that could be circulation fans. The important point here to note is these fans need to be run on a continuous basis. Even during the night time also, it is recommended to continuously run it, so that the next day morning the house would be very cool till say some 8 a.m. or so. Provide adequate space for our chicks by way of increasing the space, and also provide increased number of the drinkers that can help in getting the adequate amount of water by our birds. Take care of the litter material. We need to provide just 2 inches of litter depth. Unlike during the winter, wherein we used to go for say some 3 inches and all. Here during the summer, just 2 inches are enough. One another housing strategy to take care of the heat stress is free land growing. Wherever the free land is available adjacent to our poultry sheds, we can think of allowing our birds during the daytime outside the house, and you can allow them to have the natural atmosphere. This really allows them to move around and also have enough feed intake as well as the water intake. Free land growing, yes, it involves some kind of additional space and all, but really it fetches more benefits in terms of a performance. Avoid storing the unwanted materials inside the house. Most of the times what happens is, after brooding management and all, we are finding the brooder gourds or other chick drinkers as well as the feeders that are stored. That really prevents the cross ventilation. One another strategy is gentle walking inside the house. This gentle walking, it should be only on the lengthwise. This really helps in dissipating the air, hot air that is trapped between the birds. By way of walking, you can stimulate our birds to go and take water, to go and take feed, and also it helps in motivating the birds. To ensure proper ventilation, we need to make sure that the curtains are opened completely. Now let's see some points on the water management. In summer, the water consumption increases 3 to 4 folds. So, to meet the requirement of our birds, we need to increase the number of drinkers. That will help our birds to consume more water without spending much energy. Ensure to provide clean, cool, and fresh water always. And it is recommended to flush the water pipelines at least some 2 or 3 times, which can help the birds to have a fresh water and also cool water always. And in the case of the bell drinkers, it is recommended to rinse these bell drinkers at least some 2 or 3 times a day, so that it can avoid the contamination, and also the fresh water is made available for our chicks always. Oftentimes, we are finding the plastic tanks in the farm. See, when we are using the plastic tanks, it is recommended to go for the white colored tanks, which can help in reflecting the sunlight. If you are using the black color tanks, it is recommended to go for painting them with the white paints. And also, when you are storing the water in these tanks, you please ensure that the water tanks are always having some 80% of the tank is filled with the water. Otherwise, these plastic tanks, the water, if it is below some 50% of the capacity, the water becomes hot, and it leads to only the hot water being provided at the chick level, and our chicks, our birds, they will resist the water. Have the water tanks under the shadow. It is also recommended to have the water tanks covered with the straw and as well as gunny. And while you are filling the tanks, you can allow it to overflow, so that while overflowing, that particular water makes the straw getting wet as well as the gunny bag get wet, and ultimately the water inside the tank will become cool. It is ideal to have the water tanks in the ground. And also, if you're having any kind of a pipelines that are getting exposed to the sunlight, it is ideal to cover these pipelines with the gunny bags, and also you can sprinkle those gunnies with the water, so that it makes the water cool when it is getting traveled from one point to other point. The next one is feeding management. Any management technique that helps in improving the nutrient intake during the heat stress, that will help in reducing the performance issues. There are 3 ways to improve the feed intake. One is to increase the nutrient density. Other one is to take advantage of the cooler parts of the day, during which time you can feed, and ultimately you can ensure the standard feed intake. And the third one is ensure the proper ventilation, so that birds will feel highly comfortable and they will have a feed intake as per the recommendation. There are different feeding strategies which can be followed up during the summer stress, and one is EFR. EFR, it is early feed restriction. In the early feed restriction, what we are recommending is just restrict the feed. See, around 60% of the feed is restricted on days 4, 5 and 6. This helps out our chicks, our birds, to develop the tolerance capacity when they are facing the huge kind of a heat stress at a later point of life, just before marketing. This can be practiced coupled with EHC, that means, which we have discussed earlier, early heat conditioning. One another strategy under the feeding management is fasting or feed restriction or withdrawal of feed. This fasting really helps our birds to produce the reduced heat, and also it has got a calming effect. When can we practice the fasting? Fasting, it is recommended to be done that means at least say some 3 to 4.5 hours before the peak temperature of that particular day. Fasting to be effective, the digestive tract of our chicken needs to be empty during the heat stress. So it is critical to have or to maintain the timing and the length of the fasting. Say for example, in a summer day, the peak temperature, it reaches around say some between 1 to 2 p.m. means we have to remove the feed, we have to withdraw the feed, or at least you have to raise the feeders, say around 10 a.m. or 10:30 a.m. Why? Because see, the normal digestion process in the chicken, it gets completed between say some 3 to 3.5 hours. So during which time the heat production will be, heat increment will be very high. So it is highly advantageous if you withdraw around say some 10 or 11 a.m. That means the feed withdrawal should be done around that particular point of time to have the better efficiency or efficacy out of this particular strategy. We have seen about fasting. It has got its own disadvantage also. The thing is, in the evening time, you have to ensure that the birds are taking adequate feed by way of lowering down the feeders, as well as feeding during the night time also. The issue here is when you are going for feeding again, there will be overcrowding around the feeders. Even that can also lead to kind of a mortality. So what can we do to avoid this particular fasting? So one another practice is dual feeding. What is dual feeding? Dual feeding is to have two different kinds of feeds for our broilers. One is protein-rich feed, other one is energy-rich feed. This protein-rich feed you can feed during the cooler parts of the day, and energy-rich feed you can provide during the warmer parts of the day. What's the rationale behind recommending the protein-rich feed during the cooler parts of the day and the energy-rich feed during the warmer parts of the day? The thermic effects of the proteins are higher than the carbohydrates, and there will be higher metabolic heat during the protein digestion. So that is the reason why protein-rich feed is recommended during the cooler parts of the day and energy-rich feed during the warmer parts of the day. We can also practice wet feeding, which is commonly practiced in the layers. It helps in improving the water intake, it reduces the viscosity in the gut, and it increases the faster passage of the feed. We need to take care of gut health during the summer stress. As we have discussed initially, during the summer stress, there will be an imbalance of the gut microbiota. That means the reduced number of commensals and the increased number of the pathogens. So here it is recommended to go for a kind of a probiotic which can help in a repopulation of these microbiota to maintain the microbiota balance. One such probiotic is Bacillus subtilis PB6, which helps in a repopulation of the chicken intestine with increased number of the commensals and at the same time excluding the other pathogens. This particular probiotic, when it was used during the heat stress, it helped in improving the bird performance by way of improved FCR, reduced mortality, as well as improved body weight. And also, one another additive which can help in maintaining the gut health is butyric acid. This butyric acid during the heat stress, it really helps in maintaining the gut integrity, and so ultimately the tight junctions are maintained. Ultimately, it will not allow any kind of a pathogens or any kind of obnoxious substances to enter into the circulation. The next one is disease management. See, what are all the common diseases in summer for our broilers? Mainly the respiratory diseases like Mycoplasma, Newcastle disease, E. coli, and of course avian influenza also. So it is not only these diseases, but because of the stress, heat stress, which leads to immunosuppression, it will invite all other diseases also. So the recommendation here is we need to strictly follow the biosecurity, which can help in preventing the pathogens from entering inside our farms as well as going out of our farm. And also it is recommended to have the proper vaccination for the important diseases like IV, IBD as well as ND at the recommended periods. It is also recommended to go for a kind of a killed vaccine for Newcastle disease in the hatchery itself, so that it can it is one another step to provide the improved immunity for our birds for ND. And one another important area of focus is E. coli infection. In the case of E. coli infection, mainly it is getting transmitted through water. So please ensure the water is sanitized and also acidified with the recommended sanitizers and acidifiers. Regarding vaccination, please do all the kind of vaccinations in the early morning hours or in the late evening hours, preferably in the early morning hours. It needs to be completed before 7 a.m. We have seen different strategies to mitigate the heat stress, like housing and environmental strategies, feeding management, water management, and disease management. In addition to these managemental strategies, we have to provide a few additives both in the water as well as in the feed. These additives include electrolytes, osmolyte, trace minerals as well as vitamins. Electrolyte supplementation is very important to help our birds to recover from the acid-base imbalance which is caused during the respiratory alkalosis that is caused because of panting. A few products are ammonium chloride, sodium bicarbonate and potassium chloride. Apart from the electrolytes, other products are vitamins, vitamin E and C, and also the trace mineral. When we are talking about trace mineral, chromium is one of the important products which can help in alleviating the heat stress. Apart from this particular activity, chromium also helps in improving the immunity. One another product is osmolyte, that is betaine, which can help in regulating the osmotic environment of the cells. These are all a few supplements which can help in alleviating the heat stress for our broilers. We are having high performing birds these days. And as you know, these birds are more prone for stresses, especially the heat stress. And we have seen a few strategies here on how to mitigate these heat stress. Hope these particular inputs and insights could be of much helpful to you. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.